Hello, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today's video is going to be a bit of a hot topic because I feel like spirituality is the simple yet complex thing. I mean, it's a form of connection, it can assist in our healing and our growth. However, somewhere along the way, parts of spiritual culture have become twisted, if you will. And so today we're going to be talking about the shadow side of spirituality and the parts that not a lot of people like to acknowledge, the parts that can involve manipulation, bypassing, invalidation, or the pressure to be a certain way. So, if you've ever been in spiritual spaces and felt something off, felt confused, invalidated, or like you weren't spiritual enough, or even unsafe, well, you're not alone. And we'll go ahead and unravel and unpack this together. So, the first thing I want to get into is something that I see happen often, and it's also known as spiritual bypassing. So, essentially, spiritual bypassing is when people use spiritual language or beliefs to avoid dealing with problems or real healing or emotions. It's also known as like the love and light type of mentality where everything is fine, nothing needs to be addressed, we just need to be positive. For example, when a person is going through a really difficult time and spiritual people use phrases like just be happy or just be positive or you manifested this or this next one was said to me so often and it's so diminishing and it's you need to raise your vibration. They say these things instead of acknowledging the hurt or the trauma or whatever dense emotions might be coming up for you. Now, what does this create? It invalidates real experiences, it blocks genuine healing, and it creates shame around normal human emotions. And that to me is just tragic. I mean, there was a point in time where I used to actually feel guilty for being sad, angry, hurt, or overwhelmed when those are very natural human responses. We have every right to experience that spectrum of emotions. Real spirituality isn't about escaping emotions, it's about learning from them and moving through them with compassion and awareness. And from what I've learned, people that tend to have these tendencies of spiritual bypassing are usually people who have discomfort in vulnerability or emotions, which to me is a direct reflection to how deeply they've been able to meet within themselves. Some other archetypes, if you will, that fall into this category of spiritual bypassing are those that are looking for like quick fixes rather than doing deep work within themselves. They are people that think that spirituality is all about being happy all the time and like being at peace all the time, which is so unrealistic. And some other things would be those that feel like they're above these like denser emotions and those that fear conflict or holding space for others, which holding space for others I can have more understanding with because there was a point in time where, I mean, growing up in a household where vulnerability and feelings and emotions didn't exist, and then being taken out of that into experiences where someone was being vulnerable with me, I almost didn't know what to do. Like, I almost didn't know how to hold space for them because I'm very empathetic and I'm holding what they're feeling. However, I didn't know how to process it with them. And once I realized that, I then actively worked on overcoming that and getting really comfortable in that discomfort because I care so much about my friends and family, and I personally have been dismissed with my emotions so often that I would hate to ever be that person who dismisses someone else, especially if they're being vulnerable with me. And so I have more understanding with that one because I've kind of lived that. However, that doesn't justify like bypassing, that doesn't justify invalidating someone because they're being vulnerable or they're feeling deeply. Like, I just don't align with that. I don't agree with that. Some language that you can use to be able to hold space from others is it's okay that you feel this way. Your emotions are valid. Tell me more about what you're going through, or we can let's process this together, which that one I feel like is a very beautiful phrase, especially because it opens the door to being able to connect, and it's basically offering you up, like, I will hold this with you, like, you're not alone in this. And that feeling of not being alone in whatever you're feeling is really, really powerful. And yeah. So those are some things that I feel could really assist someone. And I just want to say that healing can be very messy sometimes, and that's okay. No one should ever tell you how you should feel. Our experiences, our wounds are very individual to us. So spirituality shouldn't suppress that. It should support it, essentially. And some other things too were asking the hard questions and really getting down to the itty gritty. And whether it's asking yourself the hard questions or asking someone else, it's really about going to that point. There's also things like therapy, journaling, doing shadow work, setting boundaries, taking accountability. And these have been things that really assisted me in my growth. So essentially, the key takeaway with this topic is spirituality that doesn't allow room for anger, grief, sadness, or denser emotions isn't spirituality. That is avoidance. That is masked as enlightenment. The next thing I want to get into is a little bit more intense, but again, necessary to discuss. And it's about predators in spiritual spaces. And what I mean by this is spiritual spaces are meant to be safe. They're meant to be a place of connection, of going inward. It can attract people who are going through like a really difficult time or feeling very vulnerable. And then there's people who know this and take advantage of that vulnerability. They take advantage of that trust. And I'll just share an experience that I've had. I used to go to ecstatic dances a lot, and I've had very beautiful moments like dancing with other people there where it was very respectful and very platonic and very pure. There was no expectation of like wanting to get to know me afterwards or anything like that, which ecstatic dance is intended to be. It's a safe space for like movement and expression. There's someone in the spiritual community who is very well known and was very trusted. And I feel like people trusted him because he was in these spaces quite often and he was very friendly, very welcoming, and I consider him a friend. But then I went to ecstatic dance one day and he was there and we ended up dancing and the energy felt immediately off. And afterwards I went to go hug him to tell him goodbye and he like told me to like don't go because he wanted like aftercare from me, which if you don't know what that is, you can look it up. But I felt so uncomfortable in that moment. I didn't even know what to do. I just like left. And I felt violated in a sense, which yeah, left me feeling uneasy because so many other people like trusted him and like so many other people were like praising him. And a couple months passed and there was enough cases against him for assault against women and girls, and I think now he's in jail. I mean, hearing that was very reassuring, but also kind of scary because I also was one of those people that experienced that. And that wasn't even like to the full extent. Like, that wasn't even like the worst of it. And so, yeah, I share this as an example of what I mean for predators in spiritual spaces because not everyone has the best intentions when they're here. And just because they are so deeply involved with a community like this who is positive and very uplifting about like healing and stuff like that, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who they are. And I've been in other experiences and other situations where unfortunately it's always men who have this ill intent that is masked through spiritual language and beliefs, and it's very disheartening. And I'm not sharing all this to create fear. I'm not sharing all this to say that spirituality is like negative or like this facade. I'm just saying that these are things that happen. And although they don't happen often, they do happen. And I feel like they're not talked about enough in these communities. And so that's why I'm just sharing everything that I am in this video. But yeah, kind of interesting. A takeaway with this would be knowing that not everything is black and white and don't really take everything at face value. Listen to your own intuition and your own inner guidance system of what feels resonant, what feels in alignment, and what more importantly feels safe. And then the next thing is something that I almost like don't want to admit, but I'm all about transparency here. And it's this like feeling of needing to look spiritual and in order to be spiritual, which is one thing that I personally struggled with at one point in my life because like my style and aesthetic doesn't like fall under these categories. And I feel like this is like the stereotypical look of spiritual people, which I question if like I was missing something and if I should cater to these like aesthetics and to like these things in order to be taken more seriously or to be accepted. It should never be the case to have to like fit a mold, and everyone's expression is different, and so diversity makes these communities beautiful, and without that, authenticity just disappears altogether, because ultimately it's how you treat people and how you show up for yourself, not how you look or what you wear. You don't need to wear like yoga pants or mala beads or tie dye unless that's your style. Like if that's your vibe, but by all means, I love that for you. However, you don't need these materialistic things in order to be accepted or to be considered spiritual if that's what you choose to identify with, you know? And then to like segue into the next topic, you especially don't need to be wearing or doing things that are like culture appropriating in order to be like considered spiritual. I feel very strongly about this one. For example, like plant medicines. So, one of the more serious and important issues amongst modern spiritual culture is the misuse of sacred plant medicines like ayahuasca, hape, even psilocybin, peyote, and like other traditional indigenous medicines without honoring the lineages or the culture or the people that have protected these practices and these medicines. I do know people who respect and honor plant medicines, especially if they're serving it to others. However, I also know people who lack the awareness or respect for what they're doing and even take on like the title of like being a shaman when they actually have no idea what they're doing. They have no respect for the medicine that they're administering, and they are not a shaman. I used to go to drum circle, and there was this man there who was like going around administering hape. And if you don't know what hape is, it is a tobacco that is used by indigenous tribes that is ground up into a very fine powder, and it is administered through the nostrils. It serves to provide grounding and presence, and it can also invoke blocked emotions as well. Very beautiful medicine. Depending on the type and the dosage, it can be pretty strong, and it's not particularly pleasant to have something blown up your nose. So, people who are trying it for the first time, it's good to start light. But this person was literally going around drum circle offering insane amounts of hape to people who have never done it before. And it was so sad to see these people's reactions just because it looked so painful and so uncomfortable. And he wasn't a shaman, and I've also been in that position where like someone who was claiming that he was offering me hape, and it was one of the worst experiences when it came to hape in my life ever. And it's things like this that are so disrespectful to indigenous practices and the sacredness of plant medicines and the cultures. And I feel like a lot of people put trust in the title rather than the person when they're claiming to be a healer or a guru or a shaman. The same thing goes for those that are like running retreats or ceremonies without any proper training or initiation, because like untrained facilitators can cause more harm than good. Going along with this topic, I would like to acknowledge the importance of not only honoring the medicines themselves, but honoring where they came from. There deserves to be conversations held about racism and land rights and colonization, because ignoring the experiences and suffering of the people who carried these traditions is just another form of spiritual bypassing. And this is something that I see happen a lot, and it's like turning a blind eye to like what's happening modern day as a way of like not giving into fear mongering or like not giving into negativity or low vibration, which cool, I get it, but like having awareness, being educated, and having these discussions and being in support of not just the medicine, but like where it comes from is a way of honoring it, is a way of acknowledging it. And it's a huge way of respecting it, because if you're going to take from a culture, you then have to stand with that culture. Okay. You can't like separate the medicine from the people who protected it. And that's just one thing that I really want to shine light on, because I see that happening a lot in the spiritual communities around me. And so, yeah, it's just like another form of cultural appropriation, another form of spiritual bypassing that gets to be recognized and gets to be acknowledged. So that is essentially everything that I wanted to discuss in this video. Thank you so much for making it this far. Thank you so much for caring. And again, I'm not sharing these to paint spirituality in this like negative way. I'm not sharing this as a way to distill fear within these communities. I'm just sharing this because these are things that I wish someone told me along my path. And everything I'm sharing is completely from experience. And so I share this with the intention of just being in support and hoping that you can benefit from something, and just calling you to trust your intuition and your own inner guidance. But I hope that you were able to take something from this video. And if anything resonated, leave it in the comments below. If you've experienced any other form of toxic spirituality, leave that in the comments below. I would love to hear about it. I'm sure other people would love to be aware of it as well. And so thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next video.